let's start with the disclaimer first. Hello everyone. First of all, it will be probably a long video, at least longer than 5 minutes, I hope. So please take some paper to take notes. If you want, you can grab your favorite beverage. If you want to get some fun, you can play some music on the background, but please make it a bit lower so you can hear me. Let's get started. So, jumping to the JIRA board. Usually you are landing somewhere here. I call it the project, your exciting project, to kind of motivate you. And also when we will create stories, they will have abbreviation of YEP. And then can say that we are working on your exciting project. YEP. Usually you will see something similar to this page with small customization. But quite often you will see something similar to it. What do we have here? We have work. Usually here you get kind of your last activities or maybe stories that you were working on it and etc. In projects, usually you have here 1, 2 or many projects. So it is basically this project as a set of stories, issues and sprints created on JIRA. Quite often you will work on one of the projects, but you might jump between 2, 3, 4 projects. One project might have multiple teams, but also one team might have 2 or 3 projects. One for the development, one for the maintaining, and etc. For example, IT support team or DevOps team who is helping to create a pipeline or to maintain the infrastructure, they might have 2 projects. First one to create a new things and second one to support something. Then we might have filters. Filters helping you to navigate between issues created in JIRA. We will talk about it a little bit later. Dashboard is kind of place to create the widgets to keep track of work done and your productivity. Usually it is good tool for the Scrum Masters or product owners to keep track of the progress. Teams. If you're working in one or multiple teams, you will have it here. And the most important button here, create. When you click on create, you create usually an epic, task, story, and etc. depending on your settings. Then what will be useful for you also, search. If you need to search something across the Confluence page or maybe items. We have here timeline. The timeline is part of the, if I can say so, this planning, execution, and control stages in the project. Because in your project, you might have milestones, so you can plan the amount of work on these dates. Usually it helps to represent the amount of work items for the client and also discuss what should be done first, what should be done afterwards, and etc. Quite often, product owner is setting up the timeline because product owner is communicating with customer. Product owner knows the priority of stories and epics. Then we go to the backlog. The backlog contains the list of work items to work on. And usually when we have an idea, we feel that something should be done, and we create a story or we create a task just to not forget about it, we should put it on the backlog. I observe it. The good strategy is to create an issue and put it on the backlog and write immediately in the description at least some key elements of the story, why it should be done and what should be done. And then quite often the product owner together with Scrum Master and the development team are doing or performing backlog refinement. When they go through the stories in the backlog, checking there together with the timeline about the priority, and then if it is needed to be merged with another story in case of duplicating, then they are merging or they are deleting or they are rejecting. If you as a developer find a problem that should be fixed soon, but there is no story for it, just create it and put it on the backlog. And we will work on the planning a little bit later, of course. Then we have board. Board usually contains 3 or 4 columns. it is to do, in progress, in review, and then done. The difference between open and to do columns. The story is in to do column, already refined, usually split it into subtask and ready to start work on it. If you have story in open column, usually it means that something is not ready yet, or maybe something is unclear so far before starting it. It is just an abstract example, sorry for bad examples, but what I mean. Assume that your team is quite smart, but you ended up in the situation that you need to analyze algorithm first, let's say during 2-3 days. It is just a relatively small task, but you have 2 algorithms. They are quite competitive. So you need to analyze and choose which one we should implement. The implementation is quite simple. You just need to analyze and choose one of them. So then you have a story to do, and then you have open story to implement an algorithm. But this algorithm will be depending on the story one. So then you have it open, and once you finish story in progress, then in review, and then it is done, then you can analyze this story. And once you analyzed it, then you can move it to do. I would recommend just go to the Scrum Master or product owner who was working on this company some period of time and ask about these boards in the company, because different companies, different styles. Some companies use epics and stories, some companies use stories and subtasks to divide the work, and etc. Then I was thinking about covering the thing, so-called requirements. I have observed it in one of the companies, and I will say that it sounds quite cool. They had a separate project which is called something like requirements for something. They had here different types of issues. They called it something like open, confirmed with customer, deviated, and something similar. And then in the list, they just created a bunch of the requirements so they can link it to stories. And for example, in one of the requirements, let's call it like we are talking about services, right? So one of the requirements might be, we are talking about not real requirement. A client can read data from sensors. It is kind of requirements number 1. And here, of course, you can add more information if needed. And if it is really needed, you can add a description here. For example, let's say that it is possible to read data from sensors in the list, and we will write here appendix 1. It is just an abstraction, but the idea. So then in your exciting project, you create an epic, and in the epic you write something like read data from sensors, and then you link it to relates to, for example, or you might have more options here, and you link it to the requirements. So then in your timeline you have epic, and then in this epic it is linked to requirements. And it was really cool because they had a full control in JIRA for the requirements, and they have kind of coverage of the requirements by epics. If you are product owner or Scrum Master, think about this approach. You can implement it in a different way, of course, but the idea itself was really cool. Since we created an epic, usually epic means some big functionality, and quite often in the epics, so if we open it and if we look at the work breakdown structure, let's look at this picture. You have execution and they lay foundation, interior work, exterior work. So in terms of the JIRA, lay foundation and interior work, exterior work would be epics because it is something big. And then you have a little bit smaller but still big things to do. It is excavate and pour. In our case, in our excited project that we are doing, our epic is to read data from sensors, for example. As you know, there is no functionality implemented yet, but it is just covering one of the requirements, and it is something big. Inside this epic, we can split it into stories. It is kind of group of work that we're planning to work on. We can create add child issue. Here we can split our epic into several steps or plan our work. I heard it from one of the product owners, and I must say I'm really grateful to work with that person. I learned many things from that product owner. I heard something similar too. I'm trying to phrase it, but epics is some big functionality in the project. Stories is part of the epics, and the aim of story is to solve a problem or functionality related to this epic. So in our case, read data from sensors. Let's think about it, because I haven't planned it yet, so it is real-time action, right? It's read data from sensors. In my mind, I see two main things. The first one is to create an let me think a little bit about it. So we have sensors. In our case, it is imaginary sensors, of course. But if we are talking about something real, usually it means that we have some code running, reading data from sensors, and then reporting it back to the main service or main application. We need to define an interface. So let's call it define an interface for data. And in JIRA, there are possibilities to set up JIRA with different ways. So we have a define an interface for data, and then we might create two child issues. The first one will be define an interface in draw.io that we have done already. Then we might have define an interface. Let me write it here. Duplicate an interface in plant.uml. And then the third one. Do we need the third one? That's a good point. We can think about it. If you open one of the subtasks, you will see that we have a story. So there is a parent story, and then we have an epic usually. So if we go to one of the subtasks, we can see parent and epic. If we are talking about stories and epics, usually stories. I apologize for the mismatch of the video, because I am recording again part of the video due to wrong information that I have said, and I would like to fix it. I was telling the difference between epic, stories, task, subtask, and when shall we use one or another. And I have found a page on JIRA which might help you to clarify what is happening. So usually we have epic as part of the big functionality. When we are talking about something really big, then we create an epic. Then epic might contain several stories or tasks. And here we have some information about it. So, for example, story, track functionality, or features expressed as user goals. And we can interpret it in the different ways. We are trying to think in a way that story requires some functionality needed, or maybe feature to implement. And it is some functionality with some complexity, if I can say so, related to a product. Then we have task. Under task, it's stated that it is track small distinct pieces of work. So, for example, if we have a functionality related to improvements, let's say we want to introduce automatic testing for our project, or we would like to increase the test coverage, then task will be more suitable. And then one thing that I would like to also cover, it is debug. So, for example, assume that we have released a release candidate version to a customer or to stakeholders, so they can run it the first time, or maybe a beta version, I would say even. Imagine that it is a beta version. All bugs collected or reported from client, customer, stakeholders, they will have a bug type, most likely. And then usually when we are planning amount of work with product owner and scrum master, there is a quite big chance that some amount of bugs will be taken as the first priority. There is a different strategies and way how to plan the work for the sprints and what it should be. Some people are saying something like 20-30% should be bug related, then 20-30% related to the development, and 20-30% related for the new features, for example, or tests, or maybe documentation or verification, but usually it doesn't work like that, and it is purely improvisation. It's a bit different part. So we have epic, and epic can include story or a task. And then story or task might have subtask. And it is depending on team and company. Sometimes people can create story and work on it within couple days or 3 days, for example, and just update the comments with the current status if needed. But sometimes people can create subtask within a story to keep track on the micro level, if I can say so. Assume that we are talking about story to create a Git repository. To keep track of all small details needed, I would create a subtask to create a Git repository to manage access for that repository, probably to set up the pipeline, just to have it set it up correctly. So that will be a small subtask to keep track of the work. The way how to split work is totally depends on the team, a company, and Scrum Master, of course. Correct hierarchy would be epic. Then we have story 1, story 2, task 1, task 2, and then, for example, in task 1 we might have subtask 1.1. Here we might have subtask 1.1. I just wanted to kind of update the description. We have an epic. Then we have story 1. Within story we might have subtask. Then we have story 2 as an example. Then we have task. So we have story and task. And within task we might have also subtask. In most cases it is depending on the configuration of JIRA within a company. Talking about the hierarchy, I also wanted to show you one of the things. It is called workflow. Please check it out, because in some companies flow might be quite strange. Under workflow it means how can you change the status of tickets. It is quite important if you have a specific workflow for the bugs, for example. First of all, if I say a ticket, usually it means an issue. So ticket is equal to issue in my cases of understanding. So we have JIRA ticket, we have JIRA issue. It is the same, it is kind of name of entity. And then we have type of this issue, and it is epic, story, task, subtask, and separately bug. It is important because different types might have different workflows. For example, if we have epics, stories, or task, we might have some similar workflow like this. So it means that we can create a JIRA item, epic, story, task, subtask, and it will have status to do. Then we can move it to any of these statuses. We can also change this workflow. Sometimes you have to do, then it should go to open, and then from open you go to in progress, then in review, and only then in done. So it is one of the ways which might be set up by your organization. The specific workflow for the bug. If a client or a customer encountered an issue that we need to fix, they creating specific type of an issue, which is called the bug, and then it gets a status open. Then let's call it like that. Specifically educated person looks at the bug and then analyzes it. And once it grabs or starts to analyze this bug, it moves the status to bug analysis. From that point, it can be moved to rejected. For example, dear customer, next time when you're trying to update a software and it doesn't work, make sure that your laptop is powered on. Or it can be moved, as you can see here, to normal case in progress. Sometimes it might be moved to resolve it. For example, we have found a duplication of the bug, so that bug is already solved. this one is also resolved as well. In most cases, it goes to the progress. Then developers are working hard to fix a problem. Once it is done, they do kind of intermediate status done, and then it should go to the verification status. And usually it means that an external forces, for example, are verifying the solution, that the bug is solved. And then if it is solved, then it is moved to resolved. From any of these steps, it might be moved to rejected. And at some points, it might go to resolve it. So it is also important when you are working with JIRA stories and items to pay attention on the workflow, because sometimes product managers, product owners, they are quite carefully working with the workflow. So that's one of the things that I wanted to cover in JIRA, and it is workflow of items. I think that I will stop here. Thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.